All right. So today we have Aditya here. He was leading the brand. He was the head of brand at Gojek. And we're very excited to learn about a bunch of things, right? So interested to learn about his background of how he kind of got this opportunity. The second thing is that we've been talking a lot about talent, right? And in terms of there's a crazy kind of talent hunt out there, and how can companies really differentiate and brand themselves. And then we're going to talk a little about some stories, like in terms of from the actual battlefield that Aditya may have had. So that's kind of the objective of this conversation, and really looking forward to this conversation, Aditya.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of let's jump right into it. So I'd love
Sure.
to learn about kind of how you got into employee branding and how you became head of brand, because I know you have a background in journalism. So would love to understand how you
Sure.
went from journalism to marketing, if that's what you always wanted
Okay.
to do, or would love to kind of learn about that.
Sure. Sure. So I actually did my post-graduation in journalism. So typical journalism graduate. After journalism, I got into Reuters, worked there for about 2 years, and Reuters was an absolutely insane experience. I learned about the US equity markets, learned about how to read a P&L statement, learned how to read an S1. Um, and I didn't value it as much, to be honest, right? But at that point, it was a treasure trove of information. The amount of information I had, and so Reuters had this software. It was called the Icon, right? It's a lesser known sort of a software when compared to Bloomberg's Terminal.
Okay.
Very similar, and essentially you could get any information you need, right? And you had unlimited access to all these brokerage reports. So it was absolutely fascinating. I wish I valued it more, but at least I took away some learnings from there, right? So I did that for a long, long time. And I think in about 2014, 2015 or so, there was one moment where I think in the third quarter, New York Times posted its earnings, and that was it was a pretty focal moment, and it was the first time digital ad revenues eclipsed advertising. Sorry, let me correct that. Subscription revenues eclipsed digital ad revenues, and I think it was $38 million versus $33 million. And the reason why I remember that so distinctly is because it was the first time I realized potentially the ad revenue model of the business is dead, right? And that had broad implications for journalism, which essentially meant that journalists will continue to remain underpaid, number one. And number two, that dependency meant you had to cut some corners somewhere, right? So that, and also look, I'll admit, I didn't have the talent for journalism. Journalism, you need to be wired, you can't have a day off, you need to be in and out with your sources, so on and so forth, right? So realized journalism is not my thing. I believe in living a fairly hedonistic lifestyle. And I realized, okay, journalism is not going to get me anywhere. And I left journalism at that point because your I realized subscription in India is going to be a difficult hill to climb. And even now, if you look at it, there are just a handful of publications, and you're doing okay, right? But yeah, I didn't want to stay there anymore, and I realized I'm not going to reach the sort of apex in that field, right? And what's the point of pursuing a career where you're not going to be the top dog, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I left journalism, and then I decided, okay, what next? And at that point, I met this lady who essentially threw me a challenge in public relations, right? And she said, why don't you come and join PR? So I went from, and I keep saying this to a lot of folks, right? I went from sort of unveiling the truth about companies to protecting the truth by joining public relations. And I did that with PR, and I did that for a while, for about 3.5 years. And I got very, very lucky because I started at a point where PR itself was nascent, but more importantly, the tech startup boom happened, right? This is when the first wave of internet unicorn companies, the Flipkarts and InMobiles of the day were really picking up. And I got even more lucky because I got to work on companies like InMobi, Razorpay, a little bit on Quicker, there's Red Hat, Salesforce. So a healthy mix of corporate and sort of startup clients, so to say.
Yeah.
So got very lucky, and public relations, I joined PR, and everything seemed so clerical, right? Like the summation of PR was find something to do, interesting to say. Well, not interesting, but you find something and then you call up a journalist and say, hey, can you write a story, right? I followed a very clerical model. So we tried to reinvent that model, right? We tried to say, okay, people want to read interesting stories. Journalists want to write interesting stories. So why can't we narrate interesting stories? And that was the model we operated in, right? And of course, it took a little bit of struggle because companies don't want to necessarily, at that point, especially, don't want to say that they messed up or they didn't do well at some portion, right? It was always a barrage of positive news. So that mindset change proved to be a bit of a problem. But what I realized was there was an obvious paucity of great content sort of marketers, right? Folks didn't understand great content, even till date. Big trouble. And you'll see me ranting about this to anyone I speak to, or on social media for that matter, right? So yeah, bottom line was PR was at its infancy at that point,
Yeah.
but growing rapaciously, and startups desperately needed great content people at that point, right? Now it's even worse, but at that point, definitely. So yeah, I started working for these clients, and I saw some early success. People liked what I did, and made a whole bunch of friends. And eventually, I just sort of realized, okay, I was the middleman in everything, right? I couldn't affect policy level change because my job was to tell a CMO, here's what you can do, right? Or a head of marketing, and ultimately, that person needed to make these calls. So while for 3.5 years, I learned a lot about this industry, and I learned about startups. I learned for the first time what a unicorn meant. Not very popular, not as popular as it is now. Mm, so yeah, so there are a bunch of things like that, and PR was quite fascinating. And eventually, I realized, okay, I need to look at one startup and see if I can do that for one startup, right? And Gojek was number one on my list. I had a list of other companies. One of our very close competitors was at number four. I think you know who. Basically, Grab. And for the life of me, I didn't know why it was at number four. I keep asking myself this, but no idea. But yeah, I reached out to Sidhu and I told him that it was sort of a mini pitch. And I said, here are a few things you guys should do and you're not doing. And it seemed like the perfect moment. Again, luck played a huge factor. It's very lucky because Sidhu reached out and said, completely agree, let's catch up, right? Caught up with him and hardly knew Gojek scale, right? So I was telling him about my experience, and Gojek said, Sidhu said that, look, we are multifold when compared to all of these startups, right? And that was the first time I learned Gojek was doing more food delivery orders at that point than Swiggy, Fresh Menu, and Zomato combined.
Yeah.
And that was just one product. And the moment I heard that, I said, okay, but what the hell is happening in the marketing side of things, right? Um, and it made perfect sense because Gojek had what I typically call the Wechat problem, which is very popular in the local markets. But because the local market is so close and people speak Bahasa Indonesia, there's no one in English propagating Gojek's voice to everywhere else.
Yeah.
Um, and Gojek set up a huge engineering center because of the obvious shortage of talent in Southeast Asia, right? So they wanted talent and they were growing rapidly and systems were breaking and nothing was working out. So they needed talent badly. So we had the first example of a company coming to India and saying, we're going to hire for premium talent, not your typical outsourcing model where there's cost arbitrage involved, right? So
Right.
Gojek was one of those first companies that started that off, right? And full kudos to the team, right? Ajay, Sidhu, so many important stakeholders. The lesser known war heroes, folks like Mehak and Shobit. And there are a lot of these guys who are not as popular. Irfan, amazing engineers, right? And probably not as vocal and probably not as this one, but we had a great tribe of engineers and product managers. And what happened was the bar was really high. The hiring bar was really high. So we'd interview a lot of people, but we'd barely hire anyone, right? And recruiters had a problem with it, and generally people in the organization had a problem with it. But I quickly understood, and this is after speaking with Sid and folks, that's not a problem. That's a good problem to have, which is you're also sending out some noise in the market that you have a very high bar to hire, right? It's very difficult to get into Gojek, right? Which is a good signal to have because then it becomes an aspirational company, right? And that was the goal anyway. So yeah, long story short, I spoke to Sidhu, and till date, I keep telling him that he hired me very quickly. He saw a few things and he just like, okay, just hire me, right? And I remember I sent him a message a while back saying that I never told you this, but I think you got really lucky, and I don't think you ever expected this. And he said, I did get lucky, and for the life of me, I didn't expect it to go this ballistic. But for me, what for me it was great because when I was hired, I didn't really get metrics to hit. I didn't get like strong OKRs, nothing. It was just look, brand value is low. We need to hire people. Do what you need to do. And for me, that was amazing because essentially I got a blank canvas, right? And the canvas was it was beautiful for a brand marketer to get something to just weave out and do whatever you want. Was amazing. And this whole function of employer branding, there was no structure to it. I was just marketing guy. That's it, right? There was no structure to it, nothing to be done. The problem statements were very simple. And then, of course, this whole idea of how it should be structured and designation, everything came in much later. But otherwise, it was just incredible. It was an incredible journey. And one of the reasons why it worked is because we looked at none of the marketing tactics, the typical marketing tactics, the playbooks that were used there. We scrapped all of that out. And we said very simple rules were set, right? Anything that we put out cannot come from a marketing guy. I'm a marketing guy, but my voice is not there anywhere.
Okay.
We spoke the voice of whom we needed to attract, which is engineers and product managers, and therein lies the success of this role, right? And if you look at this role today, I've spoken to more than 3 dozen odd folks on this role, right? Spoken to more than 8, 9 unicorn startups in India alone, and all of them struggle to wonder where this role fits in. Is it engineering? Is it product? Is it HR? Is it talent acquisition? So on, right? The reason why this role did really well is because it had absolutely nothing to do with marketing. It was focused on engineering, but using conventional and sort of non-conventional marketing tactics. And yeah, that's the long and short. But that's my career trajectory to come and join Gojek and try and figure out and do some interesting work.
Awesome, man. That definitely sounds very interesting. And there are a couple of really great threads that I picked up. So one of the things that you picked up is
Yeah.
one of the things that you mentioned was that, hey, I had a list of companies that I wanted to sort of work for. It looked like you were very proactive when it came to sort of your career trajectory rather than things coming to you. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that in terms of what led to that, right? Because I think one of the things, especially for people starting off in their careers, is taking control of their own career is something that someone needs to tell them. So was that a mentor that helped you through that? Would love to kind of dive into that.
Sure. No, I didn't have a mentor, but it just seemed obvious, right? I used to write a lot at that point, and when I was in PR, um, I did almost like 600 words almost every day.
Yeah.
There are days I did about 1,200 words. I just wrote, and I worked for a bunch of offshore sort of companies. I can't name some of them, but I shadow wrote for a lot of senior leaders. Let me put it like that. In fact, some of the articles you see in top tier publications were shadow written by me, right? So I just devoured information. I wrote a lot. So my thinking automatically evolved to, okay, if I look at a career trajectory, I don't want to get into a conventional sort of marketing company because I don't have that experience. And it would also be unfair to go join a company there and then try and figure out marketing, right? I didn't want to figure it out, especially in this side. And nor would I get something to affect real change because then I would go the conventional route. Gojek just presented itself, and yeah, I made a list and I had backup plans, and very fortunate because the existing PR clients I work with as well, offered me jobs. But I didn't take any of them because I knew about the industry really well. Great people. It would have been a very comfortable job. Uh, and I love so many of the people who I work with, and they still offer me roles, right? And they still say, when are you joining us, right? But I know about the industry, right? Where's the fun in that? When you're post 40, it probably makes sense to settle down and ease out a little and things like that. But at my age, when I can put in 12 hours a day and when I can do so much more, you don't look for stability as such. You look for something interesting, something new, a new challenge. Yeah, that's essentially what I did.
Okay, that's really great to hear. So when we talk about doing something new and doing something challenging, one thing that typically kind of comes in is sometimes a fear of failure, right? Hey, is this going to work out? Is this not going to work out? Because it is something new. And also there's a lot of FOMO, right? In a sense where there's always, especially in the tech industry right now, there's so many things that are happening. So what's kind of the mental model that you follow to sort of think through new challenges and think of them as opportunities rather than as risks? And of course, a lot of it is that innately within the person's DNA in terms of how they are. With that said, I'd love to kind of understand how you process kind of new challenges.
I don't have a framework, to be honest. It's always read more. It's fairly boring. It's fairly boring, right? Because when people ask me, generally, right? How do you look at marketing? How you look at branding? The answer to all of this is just read more, write more. Things get better. The more you, it's a very simple framework. Um, uh, the, the moment if you just read something and you try explaining this to someone, you will notice all the gaps in your explanation, right? But if you read about it and you start writing about it, you automatically it's a different paradigm altogether suddenly, because then it's not just your collective memory, because you're also sort of researching it, you're just not reading it, right?
Right.
uh, so yeah, the way I approach new challenges is I write, and I just open up Notion or whatever tool at that point, Google Docs, and I just write. And every plan, the super app campaign we did, all these plans that we did, we just wrote, open a document, just put scribble random thoughts, and then share it with the team. And then, at the time, the team was just one person, but I shoot it out to a bunch of engineers, I shoot it out to a bunch of product folks, and people would just opine, right? And not just that, I reached out to friends as well, right? And I
Yeah.
said, okay, what do you think? And I remember reaching out to this friend of mine who had nothing to do with software. He had something to do with hardware, right?
Yeah.
Which is very rare in India and Bangalore especially. But yeah, he random thoughts, and then you'd get a sense of what his thinking is like. And yeah, and then you polish your framework accordingly.
Got it. So read more, and more importantly, write those thoughts down, and you
Yeah,
yourself will be able to understand, marinate on that information to see what the gap areas are, and also get
yep,
feedback
yep,
from multiple sources. So
yep.
I love that you say that. And I think a lot of top firms, they really focused on writing.
Mm.
I know Amazon has this big culture on writing on everything and anything.
Can I tell you a fun fact?
Yeah.
In my 3.5 years at Gojek, I've never made a single PowerPoint presentation.
Love it. No PowerPoint,
And
huh?
no PowerPoint presentation at all. Even Sidhu might have done PowerPoint presentations for his leaders because that's his management structure. But because Sidhu was my sort of manager,
Yeah.
I've never done a PowerPoint presentation. Whatever I needed to do was always in Google Docs for the team or everyone else. Whether we did a quarterly review, whatever we did, was never on a PowerPoint presentation. I still don't know how to make PPTs, and I'm proud of it.
There we go. That's good. That's great, man. No, that's no, definitely. Writing is definitely something that's critical. So I'd love to, in terms of people, you come from a writing background, right? Again, part of sort of your DNA. There are folks that come from, let's say, an engineering background where they're
Yeah,
great at writing code, but they may not be really great at writing. That may not be something that's natural to them. Do
yeah.
you have any kind of thoughts or suggestions on what they can sort of do to be able to still think clearly, right? By writing. Yeah.
Got
So
it.
from your experiences working with people, what are some other
Sure.
recommendations do you have?
Yeah, this was a big problem at Gojek, right? When I joined, we realized one is it's not enough that a marketing guy goes out and tells this is Gojek and this is the Gojek story, right? It has
Right.
to come from the source of truth, which is
Right.
engineers, product managers, designers, right? But the problem with this is, and I'll go back to the Gojek problem because it's beautifully structured, right? Um, why should an engineer write, right? Because this is not their job, right? Their job
Yeah.
is to code, and they have bigger problems to solve. And the problem I was trying to solve is to hire more engineers. And now I'm trying to go to an engineer and say, pull out your bandwidth now and stop doing what you're doing, which
Right.
is code work and help us write, right? Which made no sense. And it became a problem. So we did a couple of things. One, we incentivized engineers to write. How? One, we just one simple things, paid them money for each post, right? But that's the stupidest thing to do because engineers earn enough money. They're not going to look at 2,000, 3,000 rupees and say, okay, I'm going to write now. No, but when I say incentivized, we did that. But what we also said is, look, we have a large social media following. So we will publicize your post and we will invest significant marketing dollars to ensure your posts get reach, right? So suddenly what happens is when an engineer writes this post, if someone else sees it, someone else goes to the GitHub profile, someone engages in conversation with them, then you're sort of networking, then you're connecting with like-minded people, right? So then you're building a sort of tribe. So that really kicked off, and people love that because eventually they realize, okay, I'm getting to connect with more folks and do and bounce ideas off it, right? But other than anything, network with people, right? Which why not, right? Share ideas and exchange different thoughts. So that was one side of things. Another side of things was engineers are typically shy to put themselves out there. Not
Yeah.
everyone, but some of them are, right? And as a marketing person, what I essentially said was, look, I will help you with the flow and I will help you with how this article is structured. and I will make sure it's clickbaity enough so someone reads, and I will give you input. So I will take care of the editorial sanctity of the piece.
Yeah.
So once you alienate this idea of them being judged for bad language and grammar, they get a lot more comfortable, right?
Yeah.
And of course we picked some heavy hitters and we pushed some pieces, and they tasted tremendous success, and then it trickles down, right? Then the others say, okay, posts are doing well, XYZ is getting recognized. So people started coming over. So entire 2018 was hygiene in the sense that we did all of this interesting stuff. We had a very high bar for the kind of articles that went, right? I'm sure there are about at least 50 to 100 engineers at Gojek who absolutely hate me because we had a high bar and said, no, this doesn't fit the bill. We're not going to push this, right? And I remember war story, so to say, right? Sidhu messaging me and telling me, XYZ engineer messaged me saying that you're not pushing the story. Well, dude, is there something that can be done? We can't. We got to figure this out. How do we make sure? But full kudos to Sidhu, right? He said, okay, look, man, if you want to keep the bar high and this is the bar, and if you have logical reasoning to do it, fine, I get it, right? And I've sort of jostled this out with Sidhu and so many other folks, but full kudos to them. They sort of understood the process, right? And eventually we just had a high bar. We didn't get these vanilla articles. Is it good now? Probably not. But at that point, definitely a very, very high bar. And you would see so many people calling out a blog, right? And saying obsessive idea to the problem and focus on how the solution is met. So we framed the structure really well. And that did really, really well, right? So anyway, that's how it largely worked at Gojek. People started getting recognized, and yeah, it started moving tremendously. But yeah, coming back to your question on how do you get engineers to write more? It's the thing with writing, right? There is no magic pill to this. It's simple, cliched, boring advice. 99% of the people will not follow it, but the only way to get better at writing is to
Right.
just write. That's
Yeah.
it. The more you write, the better you get. And a classic example of this is a colleague in my team. For about 9 to 10 months or so, he's been doing short form content and he's been writing more. 9 months later, I was reviewing one of his copies, and then I just looked at it and I said, wait a second. Do you realize that I have almost negligible edits on this? And then we just got on a call and I said, do you notice sort of difference? Do you notice how you structure the problem? Walk me through your logic and reasoning, right? It seems like an overnight success now, right? 9 months later, and he looked at it and said, yeah, actually, I did pretty well there, right? But 9 months back, he looked at it and he said, I don't think I could have ever structured and thought and written a particular piece like this. So yeah, the simple advice, the most effective advice, also the most boring one, and 99% of the people will fail at it, is the best way to get the best way to get better at writing is to keep writing more.
Write more. And I'm sure your coaching and the team's coaching also definitely played a factor in helping them sort of be navigated. So that's great to, that's really sort of great feedback. I'd love to kind of go back to one question that you had kind of brought up is where does this position grow, right? Where does employee branding fit? So from your experience, if you had to draw a line in the sand, where would you say this goes? Like what department does this fall under?
Product for a tech company, right? And all companies want to be tech companies. So it's very simple. The logic is very, very straightforward. It can't sit with human resources because human resources does not understand basics of marketing, and you don't have any storytelling competence there, right? You just get sort of cultural things, and people don't just want to read cultural stories. It's very easy to do. Anyone can do it. So obviously, no. Talent acquisition makes absolutely no sense because, I mean, what does talent acquisition really have to offer, right? You're just taking off from what is existing policy and you're pitching the company. So there's nothing there. Talent acquisition does not affect any policy level change as well. So again, makes no sense there. So which leaves us with marketing, engineering, and product. Yeah, marketing is reasonable because you understand how to write great content, you understand distribution, you understand things like that. But if you're building an employer branding function, you can just extrapolate all of these activities and then just slice them there, like how we did it, right? Which means you can get a designer, you can get a digital person, you can get someone for tooling, and you can just embed them as a separate team. The other one is look at embedded with engineering, which is great because that's the audience you want to target. So you talk to engineers, you understand the flavor, you understand the difference between Kafka, the author, and Kafka, the software, and so on, right? So engineering, great play. But in my opinion, and Gojek didn't do this, but this is where I stand right now, and I strongly believe on this. It has to sit with product, and the reason for that is if you tell a product manager to write a PRD, right? You with one PRD you can understand everything. You can understand how a product manager thinks about problems and solutions. Number one. Number two, you can understand how the top man, right, the top man or woman, the top boss in the organization, the chief product officer. What is his sort of ethos and how that trickles down to its employees? You can get a framework for that. And lastly, you can also understand culture, which is if this is your top dog sort of product person, how does that person obsess over edge cases? How does that person obsess over minute details that define a particular problem statement, right? With one PRD, you can assess all of this. It's very, very strong, and I believe, and I've seen this with a bunch of startups, right? And I've had the had this, how do I put it, the strong privilege of peeking into the hood and seeing how people write PRDs for multiple startups. It's one document that gives you strong insight into how thinking happens. And the job of a product manager is also to storytell in some fashion, right? You're jostling all these stakeholders and you're sort of storytelling. And yeah, it essentially sums all of it up. And if an employee branding person reports into this function, you have product managers and you're going to go tell me the genesis of these stories so I can push them out. So yeah, in my opinion, definitely with the chief product officer.
Okay, that's very. I love that you were very direct with that and also provided that explanation. So
Yep.
awesome. So in terms of, at least from my understanding, Gojek was one of the first few companies a few years ago that started with employee branding, and of course, people see the success of it, and now like everybody wants to sort of do it, right? And right now there's a mad hiring rush with people offering insane sort of quote unquote perks. So I'd love to. So now the game is even more competitive than maybe what it was 5 years ago. So I'd love to understand from you, what are some things that companies can do to stand out? Given the current kind of space that's out there.
Got it. Okay, so firstly, the employer branding function, it's sort of institutionalized now, right? Now it has a name and it has a particular, this is what folks do and things like that. Before that, it was just someone who did a bunch of these things, right? But yeah, it's sort of institutionalized now, and yeah, this role is hot, right? It's absolutely insane, and the number of startups and companies that have reached out to me, people that I've spoken to, everyone wants to do this role, right? Some are very clear on how this role it progresses, and some are trying to figure out how it progresses. But largely, it's not just about. Okay, so let me put it like this, right? Your typical marketing function hits core metrics, right? Which is I want to increase my app installs, I want to increase unique views to my website, all of that, right? But if you look at this role, it's very strategic in the sense. Hate that word, but anyway, it is fairly strategic for the first time. That word makes sense because your job is to look at sort of cognition and say, how do I attract talent? How do I convince talent that it's not just about the money, which by the way, organizations will anyway pay, but you're going to get a little more than that, right? So the mental models for this role is very complex, right? And I don't want to take sort of make it sound like my work requires intense thinking or it requires a genius to do. It's not. It's fairly simple. And I tell this to a lot of people, right? I feel like I have an exaggerated sense of self-worth. My job is not to go to an organization and say, I will window dress and make you look better. That never works because good engineers worth their salt will eventually find out about that organization one way or the other. They will speak to other engineers and they will find out how that works, right? So I can't just slap a BMW bike in front of you and say, now you'll join my organization because my organization is cool. It'll never work. You will find your usual vanilla folks join that organization, get better, or maybe get disillusioned and leave. It's never going to work. You have to look at policy. You have to look at your organization and say, I am actually good, right? Gojek worked because I didn't come and say Gojek is great and window dressed for Gojek. I just took what is there and I put that out to the market. That's it. Very simple, right? So you already have to have good engineering principles. You already have to have good engineering. You already have to have good product. You already have to think of how culture works inside the organization. And only then a practitioner like me will come and preach to the gallery, right? And then it makes sense. And then all the missing pieces come together. So, which is very funny because I can't join an organization and say I'm going to make you look better. That'll never work. Temporarily, maybe, but after that, it's just going to crumble, right? So yeah, the organization where I work will probably be because they're already good and they just need help in explaining to the world that they're good. But yeah, there's a silver lining there. Uh, there is potentially an area where I can join and say that, okay, here is what good is like. Here are a couple of things you're not doing. And I can do that in the culture side of things, right? And I can say, for example, maybe you need to do more for employees. Maybe you need to, the human resource team needs to do surveys in terms of burnout. Maybe surveys in terms of how comfortable are people with working in the organization. And then I can affect policy level change there, right? Then I can say, okay, here are things we need to do. But again, effecting that change has to come from respective departments. I'm merely a bystander understanding the market and saying, here's what needs to be done, right? So that's one aspect of things. Another aspect of things would be for, again, to sort of quote this very well, summarize this very well, I can't effect any sort of policy level change in engineering. It would simply be preposterous for me to go and tell engineering that you need to do pair programming now because here are the reasons why pair programming works, and other organizations are doing it. So please put this as a policy now so that I can go and market it. That would just be extremely foolhardy, right? And that's not my job. But my job would probably be to go and tell the engineering head or the product head saying that, hey, give me ammunition. Tell me why you're different. What is your product ethos? Why is your product culture different, right? And my conversations with Gojek was just that. I came to know what top factors are. I came to know what pair programming is, and then it just made sense. Pair programming made sense. You're setting up younger people for success, and as a marketer, it worked for me. So the summation of all of that is I can't affect change in many organizations. I'm merely a purveyor of great stories that already exist, which is so to say that I don't do much really.
No, man, you're the horn that kind of blasts the message. So no, definitely that's super valuable sort of advice. I would love to sort of get your insight into what do engineers actually care about? Because as you said, right, perks run out after a time. There are only so many things, and the market is competitive where everybody's gonna make that top payment, right? What is the thing that they truly care about? Is it hard problems? Is it, I would love to kind of get your sense of what people actually care about, or engineers specifically care about.
There's a funny story which I will tell you, right? It involves Ajay Gore, and I'm sure he'll be okay with me telling the story, right? So we were at a conference, right? And we were, as usual, trying to coax an engineer to come and join. And I don't remember the overall details. It was a while back, but the long and short of it was, this engineer said he never gets to put something in production because he's too junior to do that. And Ajay looked at him and said, freshers who join us are encouraged to do this at Gojek, and it doesn't matter, one way or the other, unless you feel that sort of ownership, it's highly unlikely you will ever build something great or want to stay in an organization that does this, right? So the only way to drive high agency, and high agency, you can't drive high agency technically, right? But the only way to sort of drive high agency is to give unlimited sort of responsibility, right? And say you now have all the power, and you're touching core database, and you will not mess up. You better not mess up. And if you do, then well, next time you will make sure you don't, because that's the level of responsibility. The moment you remove all these managerial hierarchies and you tell them that you are responsible for this work, people begin to take ownership, right? And this Gojek is a great example of that. In 2018, when you walk around the floor, most engineers, most product managers I met, they were de facto CEOs of the company, right? Everyone would walk like I own this company. Yeah. which was kind of good because they felt so deeply about the product, right? And that was because ownership was given. So the summation of all of that is fairly simple, right? The more responsibilities you give folks, engineers tend to do well, and that was the philosophy that Gojek worked on. Sorry, but I think I lost track of your question again. How do you track good engineers? Was that the question?
Or what do engineers actually care about? So one
Hmm.
answer to that is responsibility, which is
Yeah,
great. But what are some other things that you learned that they actually care about?
yeah. Another one is they want to work with people who have strong opinions that are weakly held, right? Um, so this is again coming back to, I mean, the cliche Steve Jobs quote that I seem to be quoting far often than not now, is that people work with other people and people leave other people. People don't leave companies, right?
Right, right, right.
People leave other people. Um, so engineers are very similar. They want to be surrounded with really challenging, interesting people. And you will notice the tribe. It's a closer community, right? And when someone who's been there, done that talks, you want to listen to people like that, right? And you want to see interesting, cool things that they build. The funny thing is, some of the most talented engineers, and I said this before, right? Some of the most talented engineers in Gojek are very lukewarm on social media, right? They don't talk as much, but they have a very passionate tribe, and you will see this in conferences and events, right? Where you will see folks who have real solid skin in the game, right? They are surrounded, and people ask questions to them, right? So engineers just sort of value people who know what they're talking about. And my directive to the entire team is very simple. If you ever approach a product or an engineering person from the employer branding team, you are carrying the the the, the, the legacy of this team and what it's built, right? So you will never walk into a meeting unprepared. If you don't understand core engineering terms, Google it, read about it, uh, speak to me or speak to 2 3 engineers you can call and appear dumb, right? Who are good friends, and you can reach out to them and say, hey, please explain this to me, and only then you'll go and meet. So when we book a 30-minute meeting, uh, we are very very straightforward in terms of what exactly we need from that meeting. We already have a mock story in place. The effort and work that goes into how this team looks at storytelling is incredible. I love how we process this, right? We research even personal aspects of that person, right? And I remember a teammate of mine. We had a 4-page document on this person, and this person also knows this lady we interviewed in Gojek. She also knows what her hobbies are. She stalked her Instagram. She found out what her husband does. She found out her background and research and things she's built. She trawled through product intel mails and found out what her passions are. All of that, right? So incredible amount of research. So the moment you go and you start that meeting and you have a framework of, I'm going to spend 3 minutes on this. I'm going to spend 6 minutes on this. I'm going to spend 9 minutes on this, right? To the point where my first 3 minutes I'm going to talk about as trivial as rock climbing, because I know this engineer likes rock climbing. So I'm going to warm this engineer up, right? So that attention to detail is very impressive. And the moment you get into that with that attention to detail, you earn respect out of that person. And most people, my team speaks to ensures that we have that sort of respect, so that there's no room for someone looking at this and saying, okay, I'm wasting my time. Never leave any room for that. But yeah, some of that has helped us and held us in good stead.
Okay, that's really great advice. So kind of knowing what the messaging is very critical. And the other key piece is distribution, right? In terms of figuring out what the right channels are. So I know Gojek has a very popular blog. I would love to understand, is that sort of the key channel that kind of worked for you? Or let's say in 2021, what are some key channels that you would recommend kind of brands to go kind of dominate on?
Got it. This is very simple to do, right? Distribution is king. You can have the best material out there, but if you don't get distribution, you're in trouble, right? But what we did was, and again, I say this to a lot of people, right? 2018, the entire of 2018, it looked like we did nothing because all we did was hygiene. We cleaned up our website, got in great design, put in the right kind of things that people want to read about, right? You can't just say we have a fun culture. Well, define what fun culture is, right? Explain to me what makes this fun. Explain to me what your concurrent users are. Explain to me what are your peak order limits, right? Explain to me how many microservices you have. Explain to me the architecture of that. What is fun about it, right? So that you have to quantify fun, right? So we did a whole bunch of things like that. Then we looked at touch points. Let's say an engineer wants to join you. What are they going to do? They're going to speak to other engineers. So we got that covered. We hired a good crowd and we said, here's how you can pitch for us. So I literally wrote a note and sent it to the entire organization saying that if you ever want to pitch Gojek, here's how you pitch Gojek, right? And here are critical points you should talk about. So that helped. And I remember it was in 10 words, in 50 words, in 100 words, in 150 words, like all of that, right? So made it very simple. So did that. Another one is, so one is you'll talk to fellow engineers, right? Two is you'll want to go check out the website. So explain that in detail. Three is you'll want to go check out the blog, right? And say, okay, let me see what they have. And our blog was very structured. What problems are we solving? How are we solving those problems? And ultimately, the simple rule was if someone comes and reads a blog for 5-6 minutes, they will have to walk away with something new they learned, or it has to be knowledgeable for them. If it's your, your 3-5 things that Gojek does to make everyone happy, and it's something as stupid and vanilla that we'd never push it out, right? So the guiding principle in the branding team was, what have we done to educate someone? What have we done to inform someone about something, right? So we typically avoid your corporate propaganda, which is Gojek's awesome, Gojek did this, and Gojek is great. No. One of the things that really stood out for us is we spoke heavily about Gojek's failures. So you'll see a lot of thematic stories around how we messed up, how we dropped a production database, how we there are a lot of these stories, right? How our apps are disappear from Play Store, how we messed up. There are tons of this, and in fact, we also micro story this out on platforms like Instagram. There's a series called Version Infinity, right, which is infinite problems that Gojek has, and all of the mess ups that we did, right? And we're very vocal about this, and that really stood out, right? Because hey, suddenly you're reading interesting areas in which people messed up, right? And some of it were fairly stupid as well, right? Of course, I don't get the technicalities of it. The idea was very simple. If Aditya doesn't understand this, pretty good blog. Yeah, but we'd run it through a council of other engineers and see if this makes sense. And people would be like, whoa, dude, this is kind of sensitive. Can we push this out? And then we'd hide the code and we'd do all of that. But we'd push a lot of this out, right? And it was very novel because at that point, you'd want to be known as someone who doesn't make mistakes. Great place to work. But we said, look, it's funny because a lot of people say failure is good and failure is a stepping stone to success, but no one talks about it. Like no one writes about it, and no one says this is how we messed up, right? So yeah, we started doing a lot of that and tasted early success with that. So that was again hygiene. Yeah, and 2018 was just social media hygiene, events and conferences, how we appear there, making sure we get our heavy hitters to come and talk at these events and conferences, making sure we have the best looking booth, giving someone a good experience as soon as they join us, giving a great brochure. I remember one conference we attended, multiple people came and told us, because we had so many of our standees and we had these high impact numbers and these images everywhere and all of that, and people came up to us all and say, dude, you guys cannibalize this conference. It seems like it's a Gojek conference and not a actual conference of this publication, right? So we did a lot of that. We'd bargain hard. We'd want to be known as the big daddy in the room, and yeah, make sure we had a strong presence and might in all of these conferences, and that really helped, and that eventually just sort of, and we did a whole bunch of audacious things as well, right? Which I will at some point talk to you about, and yeah, all of that came together. So it was not one single thing; it was a bunch of multiple touch points that all came together. And 2018, it seemed like we did nothing. By the end of 2018, if someone were to track my OKRs and said, what have you done? Like there's absolutely nothing. But again, kudos to senior leaders at Gojek who just looked at that and said, we're going to trust the process. We understand what's happening. Things will work out. And yeah, suddenly it seemed like Gojek became an overnight success. But yeah, the roots of that was doing typical janitor work that no one cared for.
Absolutely, man. It's typically, that definitely makes sense. And I love that. That's the insight that you're sharing. So I'd love to talk a little about, you talk about audacious things, right? So I'd love to talk a little bit about kind of, in terms of stories from the battlefield, things that were either massive successes that you didn't expect or massive failures that you expected. Yeah, I would love to kind of just hear those things.
Anecdotal fun stories that Gojek did. Okay.
There we go.
We had a couple of wild things, right? One of my favorites, which again spoke to the ethos of the organization, right? Gojek basically said, do what needs to be done, because we are, and that's how you discover brand tonality, right? And Gojek's brand tonality is a sense of arrogance and a sense of we know what we're doing, we're very good at it, and only if you're good at it, you can be with us. And once you're with us, you're never going to leave. It was that kind of arrogance in 2018, right? So one of the cool things we did, and I love this, is spoke to a bunch of people I know, and we realized in the Cessna Business Park area, there were a bunch of companies. I won't name them, but all of them had their performance appraisal, and I got to know from a couple of sources. Few startups we wanted to hire from, their performance appraisal was not too good, and they introduced a bell curve, which engineers were horrified about. They were mortified that they have a bell curve, which is ridiculous, right? Yeah, and what we did was we essentially put up a hoarding there. I don't remember the exact words, but I remember writing that, and I got an approval straight up. They said, "Do it if your neck on the line. So whatever happens, do it." So we put up a hoarding. I don't remember the exact lines, but it was something about if you're going to be bucketed in a bell curve, get out right now. Join Gojek.jobs,
Oh
something like
man.
that. And or it was that, or I think the older version of said something to the effect of bell curves are for cows. Get out of,
Oh man.
get out of it.
That's
Yeah,
awesome. I love it.
which is a funny story at that point. But yeah, we did that in early 2018, and we got or the amount of resumes we got spiked, and we did hire from companies. The lead time, it took some time. 3 to 5 months later, people referenced that one hoarding and said, we saw that, and then we came to know what Gojek is, and we wanted to understand what Gojek is. We checked out the blog, we checked out the website, and that's how we joined Gojek. So tasted some good success. But I think what it conveyed is the sheer audacity of a team to do something like this. Like people don't do strong, opinionated, fun things like this, right? They do the usual vanilla, we'll put up a hoarding sort of thing. But the
Yeah.
moment engineers look at this and say the sheer gumption for someone to do that, it also speaks to, well, that's a cool culture to work with, right? Because imagine the audacity of something like that, right? So that really worked. So that was one. Two is okay. Another anecdote which did really well. We were at a conference, and we'd always try to make interesting things happen at our conference, right? And we did this very cool thing. We had a particular board game. It was called Code Names. It's a pretty popular board game, right? So we started playing board games at the booth after a particular point, right? After, like, let's say the second half of the day, when the energy is a little low, a lot of people have already come to the booth, and now they know Gojek. We started playing board games. So we invited a bunch of people and started playing board games. It was just a lot of fun. And then uh, there was a huge crowd suddenly, right? And everyone wanted to figure out how to crack this. And it was a lot of fun because suddenly people were like, "Yo, why is everyone at the Gojek booth, right?" Um, and we played code names and immediately built rapport, right? Because then you break ice. Otherwise, it's just here's what Gojek does, and we are hiring, and then what do? Okay, leave your card, or if most engineers don't have cards.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, thank you, bye bye, check us out on the website, right? But here, there's some interaction. You're talking to them, you're getting to know them a little bit, right? So we did that for a while, and okay, I don't want to name the startup, but there were three people from this startup, right? And we told them, why don't you come over to our office? And they were pretty good, right? These three folks, solid folks, one product manager, two engineers.
Hmm.
We told them, why don't you come over to our office? And they said, you can play in your office. And we said, yeah, we have a huge boardroom, and
Yeah.
you can play in our office. And our CTO plays Age of Empires and whatnot. And they were like, what? What kind of culture is that? I said, why don't you come over to our office? So I remember we finished the conference at around 5:30. We decided to scoot, and we went to our boardroom at Gojek, and all of them came over this huge boardroom. The three of them, there were about 7, 8 Gojek folks, folks like me and some engineers and product folks. We grabbed some people on the floor who were just working and chilling. Uh, Told them come over, and then we all played this game called Secret Hitler, which is a fun, super fun game. And those three folks were just like, okay, you can make so much noise and you can play this game here. Are you kidding me? Like, what kind of organization is this? And two of them joined Gojek. I think one joined in about 2, 3 months or so, and the third one I met on the floor a while back, and they said one of the reasons why I joined is because of that one night of board games and fun. Yeah, and we ordered pizzas and we ordered Coke and maybe I will neither confirm nor deny if we ordered anything else, but we sat at that pizza and we played, and it was super super fun. Again, culture, right? How do you quantify it? How do you explain it? Minute things like this. Great anecdotal story. I love this moment. I don't think I've ever told it to too many people, but yeah, converted.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I love that everything actually boils down to culture. A lot of people
Yeah,
write
yeah.
about it, and it's really great to actually have stories that sort of explain and kind of validate that. So, now that we're in a remote environment, so for
Hmm,
example, companies that are established, right, they
hmm,
have a culture and they
yeah.
have a thread, and their job is to maintain it. I would love to understand
Hmm,
like new companies that are coming up,
hmm,
building this culture of like, hey, let's just play
yeah,
games
yeah,
together, or let's just have fun
yeah,
together is changing. Fun
yeah,
at work is changing. Do you have any
yeah.
recommendations of how that can be maintained in a remote environment, which is the new reality of the future?
I honestly don't know. This is something that I think is a solid question for the teams at resource departments, right? It's their job to do this well. And I don't know how many of them are doing it well. There are trivia quizzes you can run on Slack. There are a bunch of things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I don't know. It's something that needs to be done well, I guess. I know startups who have tripled their headcount. So you have a typical 2:1 ratio now where people don't know the other people, right? And I don't know. I don't know how it'll be sorted, how it's built. And people love work from home. You get sort of chastised if you say that you love going to office, and it's a Twitter thing apparently. But I love the office, and
Yeah.
a hybrid workplace makes sense. With some of them I understand can't. Single mothers, for example, are extremely difficult, and you should have that liberty.
Yeah.
But there is no better way to foster culture than getting a tribe of people, especially in my field. Let me just be clear before I get trolled for this. Uh, in my field, the only way to get the best stories, to eke out and understand the pulse of the organization, is sort of serendipitous moments where you understand. Some of the best stories I've written from Gojek are not planned, organized face-to-face meetings. It's all, we were playing football, or we were grabbing a beer, or I was remember talking to this wonderful coder who she was struggling with a bunch of problems, and then I said, okay, can you just help me out and understand what is it that you do? And then she sort of broke it down and she explained this, right? And then I realized this is something to do with GoFood, right? Our food delivery product. And when she explained it, I said, okay, wow, there's so many interesting stories we can do on this side of things. So all of this serendipity is completely lost now, because now it's organized, structured meetings, right? And the moment you lose that serendipity, it's a nightmare for a guy like me, because it's very difficult to do brand marketing.
Absolutely, man. No, that's a great kind of note to end this on. So Aditya, this has been
Yeah.
seriously a super powerful kind of interview and podcast where drew a lot of different learnings.
Okay.
So thank you so much for taking the time to connect today.
Thank you so much, man. I had a lot of fun. I realized I haven't told so many of these stories to so many people. So yeah, I got a chance to share some insights, sort of the playbook of what we do. Thanks for having me over.
Maybe you're gonna write about it on your
I
blog then.
should.
Huh?
I should. So I should.
Awesome, man. Thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you so much. Bye bye. Take care.